Alright, my friend, let me ask you something straight off the bat. Did you catch what Stephen Jones said in that recent interview? No? Well, buckle up, because what he dropped was more than just a few casual comments. It was a complete shift in how the Cowboys are moving forward, and honestly, barely anyone is talking about it. But if you're a true Cowboys fan, this is something you need to hear. So let me paint the picture for you. Stephen Jones sat down for a 6-minute interview and, in that short time, unloaded some serious truth bombs. At first glance, it sounded like your typical off-season talk, but when you really listen, and I mean really pay attention, you start to realize that this wasn't just about the team. This was Stephen firing back at the critics, you know, the ones. The so-called experts and even some fans who've been saying, "We've heard this before," and let's be real here, you might have thought the same thing, right? Maybe you heard the hype in the Jason Garrett era. Maybe you heard the same culture talk with Mike McCarthy. It all sounded good at the time, but how much of it actually translated to the field? Stephen knows what we've been saying. That's why this interview matters. Because now, the message has changed, the tone is different. And it's not just about saying the right things anymore, it's about showing them. We're going to break all of that down in this video, what Stephen really meant, what this says about McCarthy and Garrett, and why Brian Schottenheimer might just be the real deal this time. But before we go on, I want to hear from you. Do you believe the Cowboys have really changed their culture this time? Or do you think it's more of the same old talk? Drop a yes or no in the comments right now. And hey, if you're new here, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the rest of this breakdown. Trust me, you'll want to stick around. Ready? Let's talk facts. Now let's rewind a little and really think about why that culture message Stephen Jones talked about didn't work under Mike McCarthy. Or Jason Garrett, for that matter, because it's not like we haven't heard this stuff before, right? We're building a winning culture. We want the right kind of guys. All that sounds great in press conferences. But when the lights come on in the playoffs, that so-called culture has disappeared time and time again. Here's the truth under McCarthy, the Cowboys looked strong on paper, regular season wins, sure, but when it mattered most, the team lacked that edge. That fire, that accountability, and let's be honest, McCarthy was never really the voice of the locker room. Not in the way a head coach needs to be. It always felt like the players respected him, but they weren't inspired by him. There's a big difference there, and with Garrett? Man, that was a whole other era of clap and repeat. Garrett preached about process and hard work, but the results were always inconsistent. Year after year, it was a team with talent that never played up to its potential. The message got stale and eventually, the locker room stopped buying in. So when Stephen Jones says this year feels different, naturally, fans like you are skeptical. And honestly, you should be, because if you're not producing results, talk doesn't mean much anymore. That's exactly what Stephen is pushing back on in that interview. He's not just defending McCarthy or the front office, he's saying, "We hear you, and we know we've fallen short. Now here's where things get interesting." If culture was just a word before, who's really going to give it meaning now? Could it be Brian Schottenheimer stepping into a bigger leadership role than we thought? Before we answer that, let me ask you, do you think Mike McCarthy ever truly changed the identity of this team? Or did it feel like the same old story under a different name? Let me know in the comments. Let's keep going. The next part is where things really start to shift. Now let's get into the part that's catching everyone by surprise, Brian Schottenheimer's quiet rise to power inside the Cowboys organization. Because let's be real, this didn't happen overnight. When Schottenheimer was first brought on board, it felt like a background hire. A guy to help with game planning, work with Doc, maybe add a little experience behind the scenes. But as time went on, it became pretty clear Brian wasn't just another assistant. He was earning trust from the players, from the coaches, and most importantly, from the front office. Think about this. Even though Mike McCarthy was still technically calling the plays, A lot of the weekly prep was falling on Schottenheimer. He was scripting more and more, helping build the game plans, talking to Doc directly. And when the offense stalled like it did late last season, guess who the players were turning to for answers? It wasn't always Mike. Behind the scenes, Brian was becoming the voice of strategy, the steady hand, and that kind of influence doesn't go unnoticed, especially in a building like the Star, where the Jones family keeps their finger on everything. So now, when Stephen Jones talks about being all in on culture and accountability, don't overlook who he's really aligning with. A lot of signs point to Schottenheimer. And you know what? That might not be a bad thing. Brian comes from football royalty, but he's never been handed anything. He's coached on winning teams and been through plenty of tough seasons too. He's got grit, and maybe that's exactly what the Cowboys need right now, someone who knows how to lead without needing the spotlight. So here's the question for you: do you see Schottenheimer as the next real leader of this team? Could he be the voice the locker room finally listens to? Or do you still feel like this team needs a clean break and a new face entirely? Drop your take in the comments. I'm really curious where you stand on this. Once you're ready, we'll dig into how all this is connected to Mike Zimmer's return. So let's talk about Mike Zimmer, because his return to Dallas is more than just a cool reunion story. It's a strategic move, and if you're connecting the dots, it fits perfectly with the direction this front office seems to be heading. Zimmer's no-nonsense style has always been his calling card. Whether it was here in Dallas back in the day or during his run with the Vikings, he's never been the kind of coach to sugarcoat things. He holds players accountable, expects discipline, and brings structure to the locker room. And let's be honest, after some of the chaotic moments the Cowboys had last year, especially on defense late in the season, that kind of presence is needed. But here's where it gets interesting. Zimmer isn't coming in as some flashy head coach candidate. He's stepping in as defensive coordinator. That means he doesn't have to worry about press conferences or managing the whole roster. He just gets to focus on what he does best, building a tough, smart, physical defense. Now pair that with Schottenheimer on the offensive side, two experienced voices, both with head coaching experience, both respected around the league. That's not a coincidence, that's a shift. A shift toward leadership by committee, with strong coordinators taking the reins and possibly paving the way for something bigger. Some people think Zimmer's return is about stabilizing the defense after losing Dan Quinn, and that's true, but it's also about laying a foundation. Because if this season gets off to a rocky start, McCarthy loses the locker room, guess who the Jones family will be leaning on for answers? It won't be a rookie coordinator or a guy in over his head. It'll be veterans like Zimmer and Schottenheimer. Let me ask you this. Do you like the idea of Zimmer coming back to Dallas? Do you trust him to fix what went wrong with this defense? Or do you think his best coaching days are behind him? Sound off. In the comments, I'll be watching for your take. And next, we'll dive into what all these moves say about the Cowboys' long-term strategy. Alright, now that we've looked at Schottenheimer's impact, Zimmer's return, and the locker room dynamics, it's time to step back and ask the big question. Are the Cowboys quietly resetting their coaching structure without actually firing Mike McCarthy yet? Think about it. They didn't go after the big-name head coaching candidates this offseason. They didn't make a splashy hire that screams rebuild. But what they did do was double down on veteran coordinators with leadership experience. Guys like Schottenheimer and Zimmer don't just show up for mid-level gigs. These are men who've run teams. They know what it takes to manage a locker room, design game plans, and even take over if needed. And if you're Jerry or Stephen Jones, that's the insurance policy you need when you're stuck in the middle. You don't want to blow it all up, not yet, but you also don't want to be caught flat-footed if the team stumbles again in December. So instead of a dramatic overhaul, you bring in experienced voices and set the stage. That way, if things go south, you're not scrambling. You already have guys in the building who can steady the ship. This could be a prove-it year for McCarthy. He's still in charge, but he's no longer the unquestioned leader of the locker room. With Zimmer on defense and Schottenheimer shaping the offense, McCarthy has less room too. Coast, if he delivers, great, he keeps his job. But if not, don't be surprised if the Cowboys pivot quickly without ever calling it a rebuild. So here's what I want to know from you. Do you think this coaching setup is smart planning or a sign of internal doubt? Is McCarthy really on the hot seat, or are we reading too much into it? Let me know in the comments. And while you're at it, hit that like button if you're ready for the Cowboys to finally break through the season. Thanks for riding with me. I'll catch you in the next one, right here on Cowboys News TV.